thanks very much to members for joining and colleagues for joining us. We've got David set up his screen. So David, shall I hand over to you?
Can we just go through apologies for absence?
Oh,
which
sorry, kiss quite right.
Thank you. We've not had any apologies. Are there any declarations of interest, members? No? Great. Okay. And are we happy to agree the minutes of the 15th of November? Agreed?
Agreed.
Super. Thank you. Okay. On that note, I'll hand over to David.
Okay. Thank you, Gemma. Thank you, Susan. Excuse me. I'm hoping you can all see the screen. Okay. So I'll proceed on that basis. So, as you know, we're here for the Constitution Working Group to hopefully tie up a few loose ends. So from the last meeting, it was agreed, as you'll recall, that committee chairs would act as spokespersons, or that element of acting as a spokesperson would be integrated into the chair's role and the vice chair's role. And we need some further discussion around the scope. I know we've had quite a lot of discussion, and I'm sure you'll appreciate that it's a rather difficult one to bottom out in terms of scope, but we'll get there. I'm sure we will. And it may very well be, of course, that once things are up and running, there might need to be some tweaks to that anyway, just to see how it works in practice. So the environment thresholds had been agreed, and I've set them out there. You recall that there was an agreed change to anything between 25 and 100,000 would be agreed by the director and the 151 in consultation with the relevant committee chair, and then anything over 100,000 would be committee making that decision. And then we've got the financial limits, which we discussed to be considered further. So in terms of the member briefing, which of course was a week ago? I think it was, wasn't it? Hopefully you found that interesting. Hopefully your group members found that interesting and useful. It would be really quite useful for me and the group, I think, if there were any sort of headline reflections that that any of you have in relation to that, or feedback from your groups. So whether we do that now or whether we do that at the end, I suppose we should do it now. There's no harm in looking at that now.
If we could, David.
Yes, of course. Yeah,
I would find it helpful. I have received a lot of feedback on it, and my group are very concerned, David, and there's been nothing wrong with the process. I'm not criticising the process or your work or the officers' work. It's just a big lump to swallow, and they're not confident yet. You know, I was explaining it to Tim and Connor, like, you know, what the briefing did was, it was like telling people how to play the piano. You just lift the lid and move your fingers up and down the keys. Well, it doesn't quite work like that, and that's what they're concerned about. Or, you know, teaching a child to ride a bike. You know, you might need stabilizers for a while. It doesn't come easy. So there's no criticism here. I just feel we need to spend more time getting everyone on board with this. What we've got here is a small group of people that are agreeing something that's going to have a huge impact on a lot of people. And, you know, if you think about it, that's kind of what we're trying to tackle in terms of the committee system. So, you know, I've got no criticism of anything that's gone, you know, so far. There's no one. We're at a point where, you know, we've only got about 16 weeks left, and in fact, less than that, I think, if you look at the way the papers have to move around here. And, you know, my group are very nervous about it. That's not to say they don't want to do it. I just think we need to spend more time at this stage getting people on board, because otherwise we might hit a brick wall, you know, in 3 or 4 months' time.
Okay, no, that's really interesting and helpful. I mean, I agree entirely. It's timescales are not with us here. There's a lot to be done in a short period of time. I mean, you know, it's yeah, it will be tough to meet that timescale, and it's I mean, it's a case of, I suppose, I mean, there'll be large parts of this that once it's in place will change anyway, because that's just, you know, naturally what happens. Because it's, you know, it can say one thing on paper. I mean, of course, anything that we put together in terms of a constitution, etc., would be drafted in a way to, you know, based upon our experience and knowledge of things that have taken place at other councils and how they've worked best, but also it needs to be right for yourselves as well. So things might change. And yeah, the shorter timescales, the more, I suppose, there might be a requirement for changes once things are up and running. So, you know, where you do have the longer time frames, you can put a bit more, well, as simple as it sounds, really, more time into developing things and, you know, getting, and I hate this phrase, buy-in. So I don't know why I used it, but from members and officers as well, because it is a big change, and needs to be fully embraced to make it work. So that's really quite, you know, interesting feedback. So thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Thomas.
Oh yeah, thank you, David. So I was going to say, I think having the questions and answers that were laid out ahead of the meeting was definitely beneficial. But I think what it's demonstrated, and it sort of alludes to what Jim was alluding to as well, is the fact that for the first time, pretty much everybody on the council, the other 25 people, are now, the penny's now dropped, that that this is going to be going forward, and they want to know exactly how it's going to affect them in their current roles and in their future roles on the council. So I think the question and answer session did an absolutely fantastic job of addressing that. And what we should be able to do now is to use that to build on that, to get more participation from the other 25 members, to make sure that we're asking the right questions and we're setting things out in a way that they can understand, such that when we do move to this system, it's a lot easier for them. It's not such quite a big step, but that Q&A session definitely did an awful lot to alleviate some of the things that I've been asked down here, that's for sure. Thank you.
Okay, again, very helpful feedback. Yeah, I mean, one thing I should say is I appreciate that in an ideal world, you would have, you know, potentially all members involved in developing this, but it's just not practical, you know, even where you've got more time. So there needs to be such as group leaders that come together, but draw in that input from their groups. So, but that's not to say, you know, those members can't have input. Of course they can. But as I say, we need to be sure, though, that we're not changing the group structure in terms of what we're doing here, in terms of having you as group leaders come together. And as I say, it's a forum in which you can put forward the interests and ideas and feedback from your groups. So yeah, I mean, again, the more time you have, the easier it is to lay out or set up training and briefings that actually focus on more detailed aspects of things. Because of course, I mean, that the briefing was intended to be high level. It was intended just to set out principles and concepts and things that had been agreed by the group as kind of, you know, the skeleton of what we're looking to do here. But, you know, from the sound of it, it might be useful to, I think there's going to be a quite a significant need, both officer side and member side, for training prior to go live, so that roles are properly understood and the structure and you know, the governance is properly understood. So that will be a big part of it. But also, yeah, I think, I mean, I could tell certainly from the questions that were fielded afterwards that members appeared concerned about the change, and perhaps you know, elements of it that they weren't fully aware of. But that a big part of that as well is because there are elements of it which are still undecided. So yeah. you know, the more we go forward, the more we'll know about, you know, once we've got all of these key principles determined, we can then flesh all of that out, and then there'll be a process of bringing documents, constitution and structure and, you know, procedure rules and all the rest of it to yourselves for feedback, and to go to your groups as well and say, look, this is what's being proposed. But right now we do only have the skeleton, so it is slightly difficult, I think, for the rest of the members to you know, or for us to be able to give them more information other than sort of a headline view of, well, this is what a committee system is and this is how roles operate within that framework. So Councillor Hollingsby, you're on mute, Councillor Hollingsby.
Thank you. No, it would be no surprise to anybody, I'm sure, for me to say that I too am concerned about timescale. And I think what that briefing showed me is that a number of people were quite not appreciative of the change from the cabinet system to the committee system. And I mean, one of the reasons, of course, for that is that the new administration have only just been introduced to the cabinet system, just seem to have grabbed what their responsibilities are and their roles, only to be told that come next May that's going to change completely. And I think it's a bit of a surprise to a number of people, and I do think that, you know, time needs to be spent on actually making sure or bringing people in to understand exactly what that change in role will be.
Mm-hmm. Again, very, very useful feedback there. Again, it's about, yeah, raising understanding and making sure that people are comfortable with what's to come. I agree entirely. It's going to be a big task, but it needs to be done and done, you know, properly. Councillor Prater.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that where there are concerns, I think that as people have said, it's around detail, and in quite a lot of instances that's because it's around detail which is not written yet. And although therefore the answer, when people have asked questions on detail, the answer being given quite reasonably at this moment is, I don't know. Actually, the reframing of that is, we're still writing it. What would you like it to do? What do you want to be the answer to the detailed question? Because actually, as we're writing it, it can be that answer in a number of instances. As you say, what we've got as a working group, and we haven't agreed anything because we're a working group, and obviously constitutionally we have not agreed, but we have created a skeleton, a structure around which you are now writing the document. I don't think anyone is objecting to the skeleton. I don't think anyone has got fundamental issues with the number of committees being suggested, number of people on those committees, number of subcommittees, etc. So I think that's really good progress. But the next month or so, it's absolutely right. He's critical about getting starting to give people enough detail that they can look at and actually ask some meaningful questions and meaningful input into that via this group. So I think that we should be circulating minutes and circulating documents to all councillors as you start to pull together the constitution at this stage, which they then can see and they can feed back via this group, as opposed to the stuff coming to this group and us sending it out to the councillors and then the councillors coming back to us, and we can bring people in at this stage in terms of that detail. And as I said, I think the framing of it is that where we're saying those things haven't been decided yet, that's a positive, right? That allows them to be involved in that process. That involves them to actually be part of the question of how we frame those elements of the constitution, which have, you know, are still yet to be decided and written. And there are a number of them, but less than some people fear.
Yeah, again, thank you. That's useful. So does anybody else want to put forward any feedback from the briefing itself, or the you know, in the aftermath of the briefing? Councillor McConville.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, not so much in terms of the briefing itself. I just think next time the next all members briefing, I think it should be in person and very much more hands-on. I think it should demonstrate how the new system would effectively work. So those cabinet members would be able to see how their role would exist in the new system. So decisions coming in, how the committee chairs, vice chairs, chairs of subcommittees, how that group would act in that way, to make sure to get those decisions through the committees and all the other interactions, etc. I think I think we really need to focus between now and then on how that happens, so we can demonstrate it effectively to the whole council.
Yeah, thank you. It's, again, useful. Susan, sorry, did you want to speak?
Yeah, for me. Thanks very much. So I'm hearing that we want more engagement, more involvement with members, concerns about the timescale, and I'm not sure we can necessarily demonstrate how a committee system works beyond the committees that we've got at the moment. But I think the point, Conor, that I'm taking from it is that it's making it practical reality for some members. Of course, the decisions are made in committee, so one of the closest really is planning, isn't it? Because that's a decision made in committee. So in terms of perhaps referring members to how decisions are made, it will be perhaps that is a useful reference point. I suppose my question really to you all is what more is it that you want to do? If you want more time, I think a couple of you said about more time, more participation. What is it that we need, that you want to put into this programme before we get to April? So that would be really helpful, David, if we could just focus on that for a few minutes.
Mm-hmm. Well, just before members come in, I mean, thank you as well, Susan, for summarising that. It's really helpful because, yeah, the feedback is that there needs to be greater engagement, and that's in and of itself, it will take more time and put more pressure on resources. That's not to say it's not the right thing to do, of course not, but then it will take more time. Certainly, if there's a requirement for wider engagement and involvement of the membership of the council, yes, it will take more time because there'll be more things to consider and more opinions to consider, etc. So it's important to acknowledge that will take more time and put more pressure on the timescales. Councillor Martin?
Thanks very much, David. And I'll say again, there's no criticism of the work that's been done thus far. We're just at a point now where people are very much considering the work that we've done and are asking a lot of questions. So it seems to me that we've got two choices. We can press on and then offer people a kind of fait accompli. You sign up to this, and whatever's wrong with it, we'll sort it out and get on with it, which is not an unreasonable thing to do. Or we engage with the wider group, with the members of the council at this stage, which, as you say, will be more time consuming. The risk that we run with the former is that if we don't get to a position that people sign up to, we're stuck. We fall off of a cliff. So I think the only thing we can do really is kind of try and do greater engagement at the moment. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with the answers that were given at the briefing, but for every answer there was another question. Do you know what I mean? And as Paul said, this is a kind of natural process of people coming on board and people getting an understanding. But that's the challenge that we've got to. My view is greater engagement at this stage, or we run the risk of not bringing everybody with us if we try to give them a kind of you know, an oven ready system.
That's, yeah, again, thank you for that. Yeah, there is that risk, of course, particularly where the timeframes are short, where you, and that's a very apt phrase, an oven ready version. It'll probably be a little more than an oven ready version, I would hope. But you're right, you know, it's really important when you're changing governance structures, such a big change as it is, that you take people with you and people buy into it. Otherwise, you know, it's going to be very difficult. That's not to say ultimately you wouldn't get to a position where people are happy with it, but it might require tweaking and reconsideration once you've hit the go live button, which, you know, there will be some of that anyway, but probably more of it in where you've got the shorter timescales. So, I mean, Susan, I don't know if you is your hand raised?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. It was, yeah, no, it's useful to have members' feedback and to get a sense of what's needed. So I'm taking from that, Jim, and I guess I'll accept the silence from others, unless there's other concerns, that you want more briefings between now and the decision points. You want us to factor in more briefing sessions for members. Is that a practical way of dealing with it? Because we've got, in order for us to get to committee in May, we will have certain decision points, which will, and forgive me, David, I should know this, but I haven't got it in front of me. Amandeep, Gemma, it'd be useful if you could get it in front of you while I'm just, if we can, about the time scale. Because my understanding is a first decision point is actually when it goes to A&G. Yeah. And A&G then refer it then to full council. So those are the two main decision points that are left. Is that perhaps I'll ask Gemma to and Amandeep, sorry, to come in about. So if those are the decision points, that a report goes to A&G then recommend it to council, then working backwards, we need to do more engagement then of the wider councillor own membership prior to the A&G decision point. Is that, have I understood that correctly, Jim? Is that what you're suggesting, that we need to just have more briefing sessions before the decision points are made?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, you know, sort of putting it forward as a strategy or anything like that. But you know, that would seem sensible, Susan. That we've got to include the wider group, more briefings, more conversations, more, you know. And I mean, I'll put my hands up here. If this was a topic that I was confident on, that I knew intimately, I would be able to take on. You know, I know Connor and Tim are both very, very sort of comfortable with it and understand it fully. If I was in that position, I probably would be able to do a large part of that in my group, but I'm not in that position. So I need to include the wider group, as it were. So more briefing, more engagement, definitely the way forward in my view.
I'd suggest that the words that what we're looking for here is feedback as much as briefing. So it's taking people, you know, as we're sharing things with people, there will be opportunities for people to say, actually, could it be the other way around? I don't think there'll be many things changed at this moment, because I think when one actually explains them to there's a logic in where we've got to. But I think that we should certainly remain open to taking suggestions from any any discussions that are had.
See, Tim, I think there's a step missing before that. What people have to understand is what's being proposed, the mechanics, the day-to-day. That's what everybody's missing. They can't put up an alternative because they don't understand what's being proposed fully. Or not that they don't understand in an intellectual way, but they don't know what it means. So, you know, so I think a greater understanding of what we are currently proposing is what's required. And then they may be able to think of an alternative. But like you, I doubt if they will. It's really just understanding the mechanisms of what the committee system involves.
Amandeep. Excuse me.
Thank you, David. Just to confirm what Susan mentioned a moment ago, Susan, you're spot on. Yes, it would be formally reported to Audit and Governance and then full councils. But members, what I would like to highlight, and I think this is significant, is the timeframes and the report deadlines that we're looking at or we've mapped out as officers. So we're, according to our timetable, it will be going to Audit and Governance March and full council towards the end of March, beginning of April. So I just wanted to highlight those timeframes to you, which I think are important.
Thank you, Amandeep. Councillor Hollingsby.
Yes, thank you. I was just going to say, also, I think one of the other things that people perhaps do not understand, or would it would be better if we could explain it, or it could be explained a bit different, is the change from the responsibility of a portfolio holder in the cabinet system to somebody who's not a portfolio holder in the committee system, but might have that same responsibility other than being able to make any decision. So it's quite a different role.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. Okay. Is there anything else you want to cover on the feedback and what we're discussing presently, or shall I move forward onto the other slides? I mean, this probably requires you to go and speak to your groups a little bit and think about, you know, the structure of how we provide that increased engagement and involvement. Susan?
Well, it was precisely that, David, really. I think for me to be able to get to a draft paperwork, and Amandeep, you were able to give me the date in March where we need to get our papers submitted to A&G, because it tends up being about 2 weeks before the meeting. You know, when we get back, we will have probably about 8 weeks of time. So it'd be very useful for members to feed in what are the outstanding questions or points of understanding where we need to address in those 8 weeks, because whilst you and Amandeep will be drafting up the constitution and doing all the legal framework, if it is improving understanding, I think I need to have a bit more of a sense from members via the group leaders around what is it would be useful for us to do during January and February. So that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Right, I will propose to move onto the next slide, if that's okay. Okay, so one of the things that remains to be determined or clarified, bottomed out, is the financial thresholds for committees taking decisions. And I took on board what you were all saying previously and put forward this as a draft suggestion. So the premise of it would be, unless something had previously been approved or by the council or resources committee, or which has already been authority lawfully delegated to officers, then the resources committee will be responsible for decisions hitting those thresholds there. So it is very reflective of the key decision threshold. But I would say, I mean, that first part's really important in the sense that, say, for example, full council makes a decision and says, look, well, we're agreeing this particular, sorry if you can hear my dog whining, we're agreeing this particular project and it has this, well, X amount of funding, and within that envelope of funding, officers are authorised decisions. So where those decisions within that funding envelope were above these thresholds, they wouldn't be coming to committee, because there'd already be an overarching decision by council to say this is the project, etc., and we want officers to go in and deal with this. It's where things haven't already been determined in terms of something along the lines of a certain project or a certain decision about something or other within certain agreed budgets, or where there's a delegation elsewhere. It would then come back hitting these thresholds. So generally, you've got 300,000 the threshold, with the exception of things that have been included in an approved budget, as I've just said. Then you've got, if it's a contract, it's 500,000, and where it's acquisition or disposal of land, it would be 500,000. Or there's that where it's likely to be significant. And again, this is coming from key decision definition as presently adopted and set out in the legislation as well. Although the legislation doesn't set out the thresholds, of course, it just refers to significant in terms of expenditure or savings. Then there would be officers, the most senior chief officers would be able to make or take these key decisions where it wouldn't be practical for the committee to take the decision because it would be an urgent matter. Again, that's something that, because of the nature of the committee system, it's, the committees have to be convened in accordance with all of the appropriate serving of notices, etc., before they can make decisions collectively. So sometimes there will inevitably be instances where something is so urgent that, albeit hitting the thresholds, has to be determined. So the first tier officers would have that authority to take those decisions, but there would, of course, then be a requirement for them to report back to members about what had happened and what the decision was and why it was urgent, etc., etc. So if members are happy to sort of loosely adopt those thresholds, then that would be helpful. If not, then of course, more than happy to discuss. Councillor McConville.
Hey, David. Yeah, it's just the first bullet point, I guess, expenditure and savings. Just, are we clear that that's within an already agreed budget? So that's working with the in-year budget. I'm just concerned about that no decisions would be made on future budgets, no matter, even if the council was budget setting just as it does now, if it was looking at an item of growth or an item of saving, no matter how small or big, then that would go through the resources committee as a budget setting exercise. Is that? I just wanted to be clear on that. But once the budget's been agreed by full council, then they can work within those limits. Am I correct?
Yes. So that budget development and setting exercise, rather than it presently, as it does presently, rather than it going through the executive, no matter how big or small the individual items are, it would still go through that process. It's required to go through that process by law. Where you have a committee system, of course, you don't have the executive to undertake that particular role. It would then instead fall to the resources committee to review and propose a budget to full council, and that would be the same. You wouldn't be looking at these thresholds in terms of deciding, well, where that requirement requirement to put forward a proposal sits. So even if it's below that threshold or above that threshold, if it forms part of that, the council's annual budget, it will go through that process and it will go on to full council. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yes, no, thank you. That clarifies things. Just to give you an example, last week, items were brought for members' decisions. With a saving or a revenue increase of something like £5,000. So that was part of the budget setting exercise. So I just making sure we were clear on that.
Yeah. So again, just I think what you're probably referring to is, albeit £5,000 is a relatively small amount when you're looking at the whole budget. If there's a requirement for an additional spending of £5,000, which hasn't already been agreed as part of the settled budget, then yes, you would have to go back to full council to get the agreement as to where that 5,000 is going to come from. So to amend the budget. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Hollingsby.
Just a small point, really. I'm assuming that the first year officer, whoever that might be, would also consult with the chairman of the resources or the 151 officer if it was to that degree.
Well, certainly that can be built in. Yeah, that's a very helpful suggestion. Because yes, normally, where although it's, you know, in an executive system, it would be slightly different, but you know, sometimes you have urgency provisions built in that say that, for example, the chief executive can take the urgent decision, but in consultation with the leader or a chair, or, you know, so far as is reasonably practicable, because sometimes, of course, it might be so urgent that, you know, you can't then you can't tick the box in terms of having that consultation. You just have to get on, and there will, you know, things of that nature will be very rare. But so I think if we do add some wording in as suggested, it would have to be tempered or qualified in the sense that you could put words in so far as is reasonably practicable in the circumstances. But again, the transparency comes in. That's one means of doing it, but also the other means is making sure it is reported back to members as soon as possible after the decision's made.
I can't imagine there are very many moments whereby it would be impractical these days to have at least a conversation with the leader or the leader of a committee before making a significant decision. I mean, I accept in the days of the old cycle when you had to send them a letter. That would have taken rather longer, but you know, when it's a question of flicking somebody an email or a WhatsApp or having a conversation, there's going to be almost 0 times whereby Susan's making a decision so quickly that she couldn't just ask. She couldn't just bounce that off one other person.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the wonders of the modern world with you know, instant communication, etc., should make those instances very, very rare, but they could arise. But it's just making sure, because if you don't actually make provision for it in the decision-making framework and the procedures, etc., then it's, you know, you know, it's very much stuck if it's not already there. So it's you know.
Yeah, Jen is right, it should be there.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if Councillor McConneville, your hand was raised from previously. They call it a legacy hand, don't they? I think is the phrase that's adopted. I've heard a number of times. It's the first time I've ever used it. But is that a legacy hand, Councillor McConneville?
Yeah, sorry, lowering.
That's okay. Councillor Thomas?
Yeah, thank you, David. Just in terms of bullet point 4 and the sort of geographical considerations included in there, in terms of the significance, is that also a discussion with the chair of the relevant committee to decide on whether it fits a particular set of criteria or not? Is that what you've envisaged there?
Yes, I think so, because clearly there needs to be, someone has to make a decision or come to a view as to whether something is significant or not. So yeah, I mean, obviously officers will be involved in that consideration, but it's important that members are too. So there would be an expectation, I think, as you rightly say, that there would be, you know, if an officer was thinking, well, this might be significant, then yes, you would hope, and I'm sure they would speak with the relevant chair or other relevant members and other relevant officers before making a decision as to why it does meet that threshold. So and likewise, you know, members might be of the view that something's significant and will want to talk to officers about that and feed into any sort of decision on the basis that it should be going before members on that 4th bullet point. So yeah, it would be built in. So this is just a sort of very high level bullet point. So these things, you know, where you've got that interaction and feed in from both officers and members, yes, that would underpin this. Okay. So you happy to move forward with that as a working working model, and which of course, you know, can be tweaked further down the line if necessary. And I'm saying that, I mean, when I say further down the line, I don't mean after adoption. I mean in the process of developing the you know, the documents that are going to sit and underpin the decision making. So is that okay for that one to be? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you. So the next slide. I've been doing, as I'm sure you all have too, a lot of thinking around the role of the chair and how we can practically incorporate this spokesperson type role, for want of a better description. So, I mean, I thought I did start drafting out some more sort of specific detail things, and then realised perhaps it might not be, well, practical or ideal. And I just thought, I've been sort of flitting between, is it a case of we can't necessarily be very, very specific here, where and all we can do is set out headline principles? I don't know, your thoughts are welcome. But of course, the role of the chair, so based upon what had been agreed at the last meeting, the role of the chair would be traditional in the sense that they would preside over the meetings and they would make sure all of those things in that first part of the slide here, effective decision making, high standards of conduct, etc., everything that a chair would do anyway. And then we've got this additional function or responsibility, which is taking on that spokesperson role. So I've just put down again sort of high level principles there. So they would be responsible for developing and sharing knowledge amongst committee members. They'd be the political point of contact and be the political focus, and provide leadership. But again, having to be very careful here, because this is not a portfolio role, because there's no decision-making power there. This is a role to act on behalf of the committee. So it's not necessarily political in a traditional party political sense. It's about representing the collective political views of the committee. So as part of that, it would be being a point of contact and being involved with officers to discuss approaches to policy, which would then come before committee for decision and adoption. Again, a very important principle here is this isn't about party politics. I mean, it might be that there's a majority of a political party on a committee, and therefore a decision of the committee might reflect that political party's will, but that doesn't mean that the chair, before that decision's in place, can necessarily put forward those political views and influence. It's about collective representation. So there would be this interface with key officers, so making sure there were effective working relationships, so that there was an appropriate forum through which information is exchanged and things can be, the members' input, i.e. the collective committee input, can go forward and officers can take that on board, and then what either comes back to committee for decision reflects that, or if it's something that is about how all decisions that officers are taking, they're aware of what the committee's collective view is on whatever that might be. So representing the interests of the committee in the community and at regional and national levels, so that would be attending events and forums and whatever they might be. So, but again, making sure this is about representation of the committee, not representing a political portfolio as such from a traditional party political sense. And they would also be required to liaise with members and other partners and stakeholders and as appropriate. And I won't go into the nuts and bolts of that, because we've had a detailed discussion around making sure that it's clear that that role isn't about decision making. It's about being an interface and being a conduit through which discussions can take place and information can flow. And then periodically present reports and updates to their relevant committee. So they may have, the chair may have attended at a particular national event, so LGA or whatever it might be, and wants to feed back that information. So they would present a report and allow the committee to discuss that. And then if it impacts upon or relates to something within the scope of that committee, then there might be subsequent decisions flowing from that, which might then impact upon policy frameworks, albeit not the policy framework that's reserved to full council, of course, but recommendations could be made. So I think there's a lot still to bottom out on the role of the chair. I think we will do it, and I think, well, as I said at the start of talking to this slide, it'd be useful to have your thoughts around, can we be more specific or not at this stage? Anybody like to feed in? I appreciate it's a difficult one. Otherwise, I mean, of course it's difficult because we're still talking about it after having talked about it at previous groups. So might be one to go away then and come back with ideas, but with, as I say, that clear understanding that this is not a portfolio holder role. Councillor Martin.
Sorry, I don't unmute when I automatically raise my hand. This is yeah. I mean, here is a point. Harping back to our earlier discussions, again, I don't think in terms of the wider group, you know, that there will be alternatives suggested, or there will be. What we've got to do, I think, as the working group, is give a very clear indication and let people then educate everyone in terms of the mechanism with regard to what we're talking about. If we're still, you know, confused with choice in the working group, there's absolutely no way we're going to make February as our end date. Do you know what I mean? And I know you want to move away from the kind of concept of an oven ready, but what we've talked about previously is an evolving committee system, one that offers flexibility, etc. So I don't think anyone has got any problems with sort of committing to something that can be developed over a number of years or whatever. What people will be, you know, if we still can't decide on, you know, where the pieces go in this process, we're not going to be able to get to. Do you see what I'm saying, David? Yeah, we've got to really make decisions here in order to give a template for people to look at, and then for us to explain the mechanisms in terms of delivering that template.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, thank you. Yeah, I agree entirely. I think, of course, you know, we as a group, we'll say you as a group, not me. I'm here to provide you with advice and support, but as a group need to determine these things, and then, you know, they go back to members in whatever form for them to be told this is what the principles are and this is the mechanism through which it will operate. So, Susan?
Yeah, it was just to say, you know, if there's no other input, then I just recommend that we say that is the role of the chair and we move on, because we have about 8-9 weeks now. We need to just start putting things to bed. So if unless there's any other suggestions, I think that we just say that is the role of the chair for the committees that we've got, and move on. David, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Councillor Pracer.
Yeah, I'm broadly content with what it says there. I think actually some definition about how one shares that with the vice chair is going to be more useful than that. Otherwise, you end up with one. You know, it should be a leadership team on each committee and not a leadership one with stumped double in case of absence. So actually the sharing into the vice chair role, I think, is going to be useful there. Not least because most of what people are worried about in terms of cabinet members, and that's what cabinet members are doing anyway. The list which is there is what they're doing. They get the occasional decision, but God, is it occasional? Most of the rest is in discussion with officers, and it's nudge and suggestion and input into papers which end up going to committees. It's not a decision. Precious few decisions are actually made by cabinet members. Quite a lot of papers come with their name on, which have been written by an officer and discussed with them. And I think it's getting that separation in people's head. So ways of keeping members involved in bringing those papers forward is going to be crucial. But I think the list which is there is fine with an involvement from the vice chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hollingsby.
Yes, thank you. I was only going to say, in terms of the sort of spokes role, really. I'm assuming that covers. I mean, looking at the vice chairman and other particular roles, whether that's a spokesperson for all that is covered by the resources committee, I suppose.
Well, at a very basic level, yes, but then there would potentially be, well, we've discussed, haven't we, potential subcommittees, or there's also potential for setting up groups to look at certain things within committees. So
I think really what I was looking at is the overall. We haven't really agreed, I don't think, or come to some kind of consensus about the overall number of people who perhaps might be involved in that decision making, or will be spokespeople.
Well, it would be the chair and vice chairs of the committees and the subcommittees as well, focusing on their particular areas. So that's what we, I think, agreed at the last meeting. Okay. Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, thanks. Just to keep reiterating all the time, I think you've said it a couple of times today already. No decision-making power with this role. And I think the other key point is representing the collective political views of the committee, and not about party politics. I think it's, you've made that point here, and I think it's important that, when this is rolled out, that is absolutely crystal clear. Thank you very much, Dave.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Thomas. Okay, so Councillor McConville.
Thanks, David. Just to be brief, yeah, I mean, broadly happy with the points. You don't want to have too big a list. Yeah, just to say, maybe something in there in terms of the role of the chair, if task and finish groups or things like that, little extra bits that leap out of committees, just about sort of organising that would probably be helpful. Okay,
no, thank you. Right, I shall move to the next slide. Consultation, you'll remember that's been built in or referenced in the timetable. I think clearly it's not going to be a consultation about whether you move to a committee system, because that decision has been taken. So I was going to suggest to you, that it would be a public consultation about public participation options, in terms of how they, as members of the public, or even other stakeholders, third parties that engage with the council, how they feed into the decision-making structure. So is that by way of having a question and answer session, or etc., etc.? So I think that's probably a very helpful form of consultation with the public, rather than just saying very broadly, this is what we're doing, what do you think? And then the reason why I've put those bullet points on there is just to reflect. So first of all, there isn't any legal requirement for consultation in relation to this, but it's often helpful, particularly, as I say, in relation to how the public engage with the committee system. But if there is a decision to consult here, then it's called the Gunning Principles. It comes from a case, a Gunning case. So it's basically saying in law that if you consult, then it has to be meaningful, in summary, and there must be an appropriate consideration of any responses that are made before a final decision is made. So the message there is consultation, if we're going to do it, needs to be sufficiently clear. There must be enough information to allow an appropriate response to be made. So we need to be going to them and saying, for example, if we do it on the public participation side of things, we need to be saying, well, the council wants to adopt provisions along the following lines. We might set aside X amount of time at each committee for questions to be raised or information to be provided. What do you think? So it's that sort of thing, rather than saying it's important for the council that there is public participation. How do you think that should work? That's a bit broad. I think, so if we can go to them with suggestions, if indeed that's what you want to do in terms of consultation, as I say, it's not a legal requirement. Councillor Martin.
Sorry, just to answer your questions, David. Yes, this is all about the democratic process. This is why we're doing it. So we will have to go to consultation. No ands or ifs or buts about it. It doesn't have to be. I mean, I'll be interested to hear what everyone else says, but in my mind, it doesn't have to be an elaborate consultation. Certainly, Labour, the Lib Dems, and ourselves all stood on the basis of the introduction of a committee system. So I'm confident that we've got a mandate, but we absolutely have to consult on it. So yeah, but I don't think it has to be an elaborate consultation. Sorry, that's it. Sorry.
No, that's helpful. Thank you, Councillor Prater.
Thanks. I like the shape of what you've got there in terms of a detailed consultation about how the public can effectively get involved. So, for instance, I think that the principle of having a public questions at all committees would be helpful. So questions to chair at all committees as opposed to just to full council as currently. But at the moment, you can't ask a question to cabinet if it's a member of the public. You should be able to ask a question to each of the committees as well as council, as far as I'm concerned. Potentially a standalone Q&A on a regular basis with the chair, or the ability that you get a written response within a reasonable period of a quick period of time from the leader of the council. Something outside those meetings would be a useful process, and also something that was discussed broadly around the consultation session was ways that potentially the public could put something onto a committee agenda rather than nodding cabinet members. At the moment, there's a process whereby there's the overview and scrutiny process plan is put together for a year, and the public can input into that and can effectively put things onto the overview and scrutiny agenda. The ways a similar mechanism which allowed them to put things in advance for consideration onto a committee agenda might be a useful mechanism as well. So I think those and the ability to ask questions into committees, etc., we could come up with a number of options which we could then consult on meaningfully and actually ask people whether they think that they would be valuable or how they would tweak them in order to improve the public input into how the council runs.
Oh, okay, thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think two things really. The first is that we're already arguably ahead of the game with regard to this, having made what I think is a very brave decision to put this into a public forum on YouTube at a very early stage. So for those people who are interested, they're able to see the development of this so far, and I think that'll help. Just in terms of what form it needs to take. If you look at the timescales, we'd be looking at holding something in January, probably, or maybe even early February, to have a town hall type meeting with questions in advance that that could be answered, so it doesn't degenerate into something which is unmanageable. So again, I think for us, we're already partway down that road in terms of consulting, because the decision we've already made to make these meetings available to the public. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Susan?
Thank you, and it's really helpful to get members' input in terms of what the scope of the consultation is. Of course, I think it's quite clear that you do want to consult. So I think there's an answer there for us, David, and do they want to consult or not? I think the overwhelming, what I'm hearing is, yes, you do want to consult. The scope of that consultation, the suggestion that I've heard so far is really around public involvement and participation. If there's any other scope, please do give us that information as soon as possible, members. I think it's a nature. I've got a question about the nature of the consultation. Of course, an online consultation is the easiest, most straightforward, and perhaps least resource intensive. If you're talking about public meetings, that's quite another matter. And also, one of the principles that you've outlined, David, is that there's adequate time for consideration of the responses. Now, if we are having to prepare paperwork for decision at the end of February, you will want to have a conclusion to any consultation by early February for us to have then worked through what are the what's the input, what's the consequences arising or the implications arising. So we're only talking around a window on the current timeline. You've only got a window of consulting, I would suggest, in January, unless, David, you know of any other way around it. which means that it has to be quite limited, I would suggest, in terms of scope and mechanisms for doing so. Two things really, I suppose, in summary, one of which is if you want any more scope other than public consultation, as Councillor Prater has said, can you please let us know ASAP? And I think in view of the timeline, it's going to have to be something like online consultations, because I just can't see how we're going to be able to resource anything beyond that, unless, David, you have some creative solutions to offer. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, again, it comes down to it. You have to give adequate time, both in terms of allowing input and also in terms of considering that input. And time is of the essence here. So yeah, it needs to be, as I said, you know, it needs to be as specific as it can be, and which, you know, it can. We can get something out, and Councillor Prater's suggestions around potential involvement, that all sounds, you know, sensible to me. In terms of the form in which the consultation takes place, yeah, it would have to be something practical and manageable in the timeframes, and online consultation, or even, you know, group members of the council getting the message out there, or some sort of press release, and then you know, if the direction where to find the interface on the website where you can put your thoughts in, but also I suppose the public can perhaps potentially feed into members who can then pass on their behalf. So, but yeah, it would need to be focused. It would need to be done in an efficient way, as it would anyway. To Councillor Prater.
Although I accept that meetings have got an overhead, is there not scope for having an online consultation, etc., and doing that piece of press work and getting councillors involved, but towards the end of that period of time having one evening meeting, at which point the online consultation is discussed, and it allows people to input physically into the meeting. There are some people who would find that a more constructive way of doing so than me. I'd love to send you an email. I will fill in the online survey. There are other people who do not like it that way. So if we had one public engagement event around asking the same questions and giving some opportunity for some question answering, I think that would just add an extra thing to that, and one extra point to it. But otherwise, I fully accept it, keeping it mainly online and through press work and through council, and giving councillors the opportunity to share and to discuss. But I think one session that we can actually get the public into as part of that process, probably towards the back end of January, I think would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, just really to agree wholeheartedly with Tim. I think an online consultation concluding in a public meeting, and I think, you know, talking about the wider group, it would be very helpful for all councillors to attend, or as many that are available to attend that consultation, because again, a number of questions I'm sure will be discussed, answered, and we'll just give people more information, more ways of thinking, more ways of looking at things. So I would very much agree with Tim. Online consultation concluding in a single event, and then drawing the line under that.
It also gives us a sale point for this as well. It also means that people are seeing this constitutional discussion and change. It gives you better public. We can end up with something that gives better opportunities for the public to be involved in council business on a regular basis, and many people would like to see that. The rest of it feels quite those of us who like a constitution and know how councils run, this is all good stuff. Most people don't know and don't care, but actually opportunities to ask questions to different committees, opportunities to input things, opportunities to get things onto the agenda for the general public, they'll like that.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. But again, and it's not to say that wouldn't or shouldn't happen. The timescales are very pressured. You know, the time frame that we're working with is very pressured. So adding things in, I'm not saying that, as I say, we're adding consultation in. It was something that was anticipated, but the form in which it occurs, doing something like that will add pressure. As I say, that's not to say it shouldn't happen, because I think there is a value to that. I agree. Okay, right. I realise we've gone over time, and I apologise. So that was the extent of what I wanted to put and discuss with you. Obviously, that slide says discussion, but I think we've had a very helpful discussion throughout, for which I'm really grateful. It's always really useful for me to have these discussions with you. So I propose to leave things there, or I'll hand back over to Susan at this point, if I may.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you, members. That's really helpful. So we will regroup as a team to see if we can get any more member briefings in, and we will have a further discussion about the scope of and the nature of an online consultation, and culminating in an online meeting towards the end of January. So we'll have some thoughts about that. And send round. My request really, I suppose, for members is to continue with keeping the profile of this up with your groups, and if there are further questions, if they can be sent through to us, and then we'll respond to them as they come, so that we're keeping the subject and you and through your groups are keeping the subject very live and current, and so that helps in itself to flush out levels of understanding or points of clarification that you need. And I think, David, as a team, we will probably find that very helpful for members to do so. That was really all I had as a sort of concluding comment, unless there's any other issues that members want to raise with us while we're together. And the next meeting, David, of the working group is when, or Gemma, Amandeep, do you have that information? Amandeep, Gemma?
I'm just going to, yes, I'm just going to look now, Susan. Sorry, I'm just bringing it up. Bear with me one moment.
Right, 25th of January.
That's right. Yes, thank you, Gemma.
24th of January. Okay, so
Sorry,
I guess 25th. Okay, so my immediate reaction is, you know, I don't. I think that we probably need to get the working group together before then, because if we're going to have further work on consultation, we need to really make sure that we've scoped out what that consultation looks like and the nature of it. We've been given a headline steer, but I don't think we can wait until the 25th of January, to be quite honest, to get you all back together again to check that out. So I think, Amandeep, Gemma, we will need to get a slot in the diary, probably earlier January, just to go through with members about what the nature of that consultation looks like, and what the forward look is from there on in.
Yeah, no, that's not a problem, Susan. I'll work with Gemma. We'll get something moved forward much earlier.
Okay, great. Anything else then for members? No. Okay. All right.
Thanks as ever. That's really helpful.
Thank you very much,
terrific.
everyone.
Thanks, David. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
All right.
Thank you, Susan. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you. Thank you. Happy Christmas, everybody.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.